You know it's this. Take a break and talk it and see. Money swallowed like sis. They done perfected the kid. Got a billion who take on my hate. Nothing better. Put out the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil, that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the first part of What If Deku Meets Overlord? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of lazyfrogofjustice on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. How bad are we talking about? Detective Tsukachi Naomasa asked as it was followed by uneasy and silent glances between two officers that were now in command of the crime scene. The night was at its peak and a sudden call to duty, while usual in this line of work, was still bound to surprise. Specifically, with what they were dealing at the current moment. Well, are you two going to talk, or should we just get a move on to see what's happened inside? Officer Sansa said to the two cops that were still trying to think what was best to say to their superiors. Tsukachi noticed their rather subdued appearances and thought that this was truly one of those cases. It's not easy to rattle a police officer, especially with the cases they take on a daily basis. Where is Sir Night-Eye? I thought he was the point man in this investigation. Is he or his representative within the premises right now? Tsukachi said, hoping to get an answer this time. For a few seconds the two detectives thought that they were about to hit another brick wall, but thankfully one of them spoke up. It came just in time as more paramedics and police forces rolled into the scene with the sounds of sirens blaring in the night. He's been down there for a while, sir. Him and his sidekick haven't gone up ever since we entered the place, especially after. There was a pause to the officer's sentence as he looked at his silent colleague. I think it's best you see it yourself. We don't really know how to react to it. The other finished for his comrade, putting some suspicion and blunt curiosity to the two detectives on the scene. Tsukachi already prepared himself should they need to brief his contact about it, but with Sir Night-Eye here, he reckoned that it was best that he would decide what to do. Since he was in fact his sidekick back in the day. The two officers then lead their superiors through the pristine, undisturbed and oddly untouched white wall of the compound itself. The only noticeable thing about the entrance was the steel gate, which looked it was grabbed by something with enough strength to crunch it like paper. The remains of the gate were placed at the side of the entrance, with the bolts formerly holding it from the inside got ripped from both sides of the walls it once clung to. Tsukachi and the others were not particularly interested with that detail, as they had already seen and experienced various strength-based quirks throughout their years in service. Add the fact that the #1 hero of Japan had done so more feats that to them were considered impossible, this little show of strength was negligible compared to the overwhelming might of the #1 hero. An easy feat, if he were the one that did this. As they entered the compound with various more officers taking pictures of the crime scene and cordoning off the compound itself, they noticed that there were far too little signs of this being an attack. Far too many to count with how little evidence was left. Normally they would discount this as an orchestrated and meticulously planned covert operation given the professionalism displayed at first glance, but since everything was so suspiciously clean at the forefront they thought that this could be the result of a rival faction taking matters in their own hands. Especially with the recently investigated occupants of this compound. Those belonging to a Yakuza group that was formerly influential in the past amongst others like it. Tsukachi took a deep breath as he looked at the clean surroundings and began to worry that something like this could further make law enforcement strong, as there were already villain groups that they kept watch on within multiple prefectures and cities. The two officers then lead their superiors towards the entrance of the main building. The ornate and traditional style of the compound made everything feel like this was a false place for villains to cover their ill intentions at first glance, but both of them knew better that not everything is what it seems, especially when groups like these tend to get organized, and for worse, smarter. This is far too clean even for my taste. Officer Sansa said as the two officers opened the door for them. Tsukachi nodded to his assessment as there was no BLD, nor any signs of there being a struggle of any kind if this was indeed an attack. At the very least there would be something worth noting than the crumpled steel gate from earlier. Tsukachi was about to say something when the two officers opened the main door, only to be greeted by a gruesome sight within inches away from their faces. What in the world? A sudden, frightening chill went down everyone's spine. A turmoil of unspoken horror was shared amongst them as their eyes widened in contact. BLD and bodily fluids were trickling down from the ceiling. Sinews, bone fragments, and little traces of muscle were dangling across their vision with organs and clotting masses of what once looked like skin were molted into the concrete. Fluids of various kinds dripped on the messy floor with what looked to be remains of skulls were flattened on the sides of the wall which were part with the fleshy, disorganized mass that stuck on every corner of their vision, except for the floor. There were no lights that were of use in the horrific mess of a room. Only the flashlights of many police officers including them that were inside were the only guiding light that eerily influenced the atmosphere and feeling within the premises. Silent curses were shared along with faces hidden behind face masks as those in clean-up duty for the crime scene were trying their best to make do with what they were seeing. Tsukachi's mouth was partially open in shock. He was then interrupted by his colleague who had offered a face mask for him to use. Both men were frightened with the sight before them. With Tsukachi unknowingly feeling the hairs on his arms standing, along with Sansa's more noticeable changes given his feline-like mutation quirk. Even the officers that guided the two inside of this place were on edge. The permeating dread only heightened the questions that wrapped itself with this place and how quiet it had been. How was this called in? Sansa asked as he moved to the side, only enough for him not to touch the walls which were littered with the fleshy mass. His footwear now gouged with those sticky fluids as Tsukachi took off his trench coat. To their minds, they were still shocked that a quirk like this existed. Even though they had read the case files surrounding the occupants within this compound, they were still baffled and chillingly confused with what they were seeing. A bunch of neighbors complained about a smell a few hours earlier. It got so bad that they had to call a few of us in to investigate. Unfortunately, there were no incidents of sewage problems or any crimes of any kind close to this neighborhood, and the smell quickly went away after an hour. It was only then that a few eyewitnesses spotted that the gates to this compound were crumpled to SHT. Some of the officers weren't aware that a pro-hero was already on the case, but we trudged in regardless. Nobody noticed anyone entering the compound? Tsukachi asked as he took one of the flashlights from the two and illuminated the flesh masses that were lining the hallway that lead to somewhere. The scent and the image of his surroundings not helping to alleviate the mood at all. That's the thing, detective, nobody had seen anyone enter the compound, nor were there any sounds of engagement before the calls were made. Surveillance tapes even show it. Until a small fluke surprised the rest of us. A small fluke? Sansa said as he put on his gloves and touched the fleshy mass closest to him. A trickle of BLD dripped on his head, causing him to flinch. There was a glitch, at least that's what Sir Nightie's sidekick said to us. The surveillance on the compound seemingly began to glitch at one point and lost coverage over it for 12 seconds. After 12 seconds, it was only there that we saw the crumpled mess of a gate outside. As if everything that occurred here only happened in that span of blind coverage and was seemingly finished after the footage was back online. What? How is that even possible? That would be way too fast for anyone to do this. Sansa commented as he pulled his hands away from the globes of flesh. An eye seemingly watching him on the flesh mass he touched, giving off an unsettling feeling as his eyes narrowed. That's the reason why Sir Nightie hurriedly called us to assist. He's been down there for hours now. We don't know why. One of the two said to the dimly lit hallway where some personnel were seen taking samples and taking pictures. The flashes of light giving an ominous, dark feeling to the atmosphere of the overall place in general. Do you think this is related to the other cases recently? Tsukachi asked his comrades. This is far too excessive. Even if we were to relate them, the perpetrators were never this brutal. This feels more like someone psychotic had painted his canvas using the victims that were guarding this place. Sansa said in an emotionless, serious tone. Though his words held weight, and he was only regulating his emotions to the vast permeating sense of fear that was enveloping the psyche of everyone present. Even their experience on the job never prepared them for things like this. And what to do with it as well. Tsukachi shined the light of his flashlight on the walls as they proceeded to move towards the darkened hallway. Sounds of the personnel outside being drowned out by the ominous echoing sound of air filling the hallways of this disturbing scene. As they moved forward, a small mass of yellow was bubbling on one part of the fleshy mass, pus oozed out of it as the strained stomachs and appetites of the police force venturing into the unknown were now struggling to keep their meals in. Why do I get the feeling that these things on the wall are still alive? Tsukachi said. The two police officers in front of them stopped and looked at one another. The implication not lost on both Sansa and Tsukachi. Wait, are you suggesting? If you're wondering why we haven't totally scraped them from the walls, sir, then yes. You get the idea. One of the two said, giving off a horrific vibe as Sansa recalled the eye he saw earlier, how it focused on him and how some parts of tissue and muscle were still pulsating, despite their mangled and disturbing condition. A gulp was made by Sansa as they continued forward. Questions of the disturbing revelations still fresh in their minds. How many individuals were part of that? Tsukachi asked. Based on some of the clothes and remains of identification we have, we think the number is between 6 and 4. As for what god-forsaken quirk turned them to that, we're not sure. Not anything like it has ever been registered, let alone as far as we know, even Sir Nighthide agrees to it. But isn't one of the occupants capable of such a thing? Sansa said as they started to pass deeper into the hallway, the flesh mass now behind them as they saw more police force personnel doing their standard procedures. Sir Nighthide thought of the same thing. However, most of the subjects that the individual you're suggesting has never left anything this gruesome nor erratic in the first place. Even if he was the person that did it, it wouldn't make sense that he would somehow lose control and focus over his quirk and deliberately kill his own men in the process. Unless it's a mind-based quirk. Tsukachi suggested. Maybe, but until we have more evidence to suggest that, sir, I believe we can't ultimately speculate on that one idea entirely. Tsukachi and Sansa agreed with a silent nod as they treaded forward. Their light stopping short when they saw a group of forensic operators and police personnel examining another batch of bodies strewn on the hallways. As they arrived, Tsukachi noticed that the bodies looked pale, like they were dead for a few days. No damage of any sort was found. No signs of poisoning, blunt force trauma, nor anything to indicate something external was done to the bodies would suggest how they died. They simply looked dead, akin to how patients in the hospital basically wilted away on their beds. One of them was a small-stature individual that was garbed in a black suit. A bird-like mask on his face, but he looked harmless as he was strewn on the floor, motionless and dead. What happened to them? Tsukachi asked one of the forensics team. We don't know, their vitals are gone. It's like they just died, where they stood, the examiner replied as he continued to take samples from the bodies. His tone questioning the reasoning behind the very odd and strange results of how these bodies basically just ceased from living. Sansa and Tsukachi remained wordless after that as they continued down the maze of hallways, now slowly being filled by more personnel to fill the dimly lit and ominous atmosphere of the foreboding compound. The place felt like it wanted to draw everyone in for a trap, but its contents and the remains of the dead they have seen so far have only indicated one sign that they both agreed on. That whoever orchestrated the attack left the occupants of this compound virtually helpless, that they just died defending it without any chance of retaliating at all. It gave Tsukachi some distinct fears to think on. Especially if this suggested the return of one villain in the past that managed to scar the symbol of peace into the state he was now. He was scared to suggest the idea in his head at first, but given the circumstances surrounding the compound state and how broad the usage of quirks were in application, he began to gravitate towards it. As he pondered over these thoughts, he was never ready to see what the two showed them both next. For the dimly lit hallway was now slightly illuminated with a big lamp showing multiple personnel looking over a broken part of the hallway where debris and various ruptured crevices filled the once clean background. Like a fight between two titans of strength happened, and this was the result. Craters of various sizes filled the area of their vision as Tsukachi looked around with his flashlight. "Tsukachi, you need to see this," Sansa said as he stared within that broken-apart room. Jaws slightly dropping in sheer shock as they saw the remnants. At the very entrance to what was once a door to this room lay a person that was seemingly petrified in place. His body burned by what could possibly be acid of some kind, as bubbling remnants of singed flesh and bone were seen as the individual's arms were crossed on its face. The burned skin on his fingers now cauterized on his eyes, an expression of pure agony on what remained on his face was seen. His clothes were burnt to sore blackness and his feet were stuck to the floor. His entire body iodized and seemingly now a morbid statue that was solidified in place. Smoke and stench of burnt skin and hair filled the air as sounds of what first sounded like someone frying something with oil was in fact the body still slowly receiving the effects of the whatever concoction caused him to be this way. Tsukachi thanked to whoever was up there that he agreed to wear a mask. The stench was unlike anything he had ever smelled. Coupled with how it reacted to human remains, he imagined how that person felt before he shared his final moments to himself. "That's not all, sir," the two said as they pointed on the other individual in the room. That's when they both noticed that thin, black-like humanoids with slimy black ooze covering their bodies were the ones occupying the broken craters on the walls. These humanoids looked dead and were unmoving. At first Tsukachi thought these were individuals with a possible cloning quirk, but what he saw on the center of the room was unlike anything he had ever seen before. A large body of a muscular man was in the middle of the room. Black, sticky and scantily smelling liquid was pooled where his body was. The most shocking aspect of it was that the liquid was not blood, but something else entirely. What caught everybody's eye was that the muscular, bird-masked individual looked like it was ripped apart in two. His neck and head dangling in a morbid lopsided position as the other half of his body lay many inches away. Flesh and organs were strewn out, but no red blood was present, as if the black liquid was his blood, and out of that ripped portion came four of those black humanoids, as if they died the moment they reached the outside confines of the body. As if they ripped themselves out of the dead man's corpse when he was still alive. There were other of those black humanoids that breached the skin and body of the corpse. All of them lying dead with their origin of BRTH. It all played like a morbid art project from the most psychotic of minds derived from the mental hospitals. This however was real, and the filth of the image itself was burned into their minds. The brutality and stark reality of the things they have seen so far put almost everything in their individual experiences to shame. One would even say that if it nor for their jobs, the horrific sights they have seen so far would make a normal person go mad. Thankfully, with years of experience behind their belts, the images now fresh in their mind were far more bearable than before. That in itself was not something they were proud of, however. One of the police officers handling the bodies neared one of those humanoids that were dangling lifelessly out of the man's stomach. With an extended metal contraption, they tried to flip over its body. Sounds of the sticky black material were heard as they managed to see the states of one of these humanoids. As they did so, however, one revelation dawned on them. Scared murmurs were shared by those watching it taking place as the police officer that held the contraption screamed slightly in fear, dropping the metal tool as it collided to the floor with an echoing sound. Flashlights were aimed at the humanoid, whose chest was rising and falling slightly. Even though it seemed dead, the fact that it was still breathing gave away horror to everyone's senses. A bead of sweat dripped on the side of Tsukachi's forehead, with Sansa's palms slowly getting wet as he aimed his source of light on the other humanoids within the room. The mood and tone of this place felt unnatural. Like something out of a horror film, a very disturbing horror film. Detective Naomasa. Sir Night Eye wants to see you. A voice called out, eyes drifted towards the hallway where Bubble Girl, the sidekick of the aforementioned pro-hero stood. Her composure still strong, albeit her face and eyes displayed a feeling of forlorn discomfort towards this place. A feeling shared by everyone at that particular moment. Tsukachi and Sansa quickly regained their focus as they followed the sidekick to find their way back to Night Eye. They managed to bid the two officers to stay and help with the cleanup as Bubble Girl would take the reins on guiding them. At first, Tsukachi expected the young woman to say anything during their walk in the very elaborate and expansive underground complex this place had, but Bubble Girl kept to her own muses and would only answer if she was questioned. It bothered both officers as they knew that the girl was particularly talkative, so for her to change tone during their entire walk further increased the discomfort they felt. The deeper they went into the underground system, the more they noticed that fewer and fewer personnel were seen. There were still enough not to make everyone feel uneasy, but the lesser lights and fewer people present made everything worse in comparison. Especially with what they saw along the way. Corridors of strong concrete were pulverized, debris and other increments almost barred the passageways. It felt like a titan of sorts had rampaged itself within these halls, and those foolish enough to fight it were seemingly frozen in place. Pieces of frostbite-laden body parts were scattered, making both detectives to question as to what exactly happened. It was impossible for someone to have a strength quirk, along with a freezing quirk that they knew of. What bore a strong image in their eyes however was the fact that the bodies looked petrified, like they had no chance at all of fighting back, merely struck by an unknown force seconds in, with their lives taken before they even had the gall to react. There were also other rooms that they observed having the same horrific results. One being two police personnel trying to remove a limbless corpse mangled to an indistinguishable shape along with many others that littered that part of the room. Broken bird masks and the like were scattered everywhere along with various other bodies, dismantled and broken to the point that none of them could imagine. It challenged most of what the two's perception was in terms of how far people can be when they were at their worst. The fact that they were this affected even with their time and experience as police officers spoke volumes as to the unreal results they were seeing here. And worst of all, it would only get more bizarre as they arrived at one large demolished opening at one end of the hallways. It was large enough in stature that Tsukachi was sure that only All Might could have done so to breach such a large lengthy opening with ease. And there on the middle of it all, stood Sir Night Eye. A flashlight in hand, standing still at the sight he was seeing. The two were not aware of what the contents were inside the breach, but they took a cautious stride as Bubble Girl called out to her boss. After an exchange of a few greetings, Night Eye returned his focus on the breach. To which made Tsukachi's utterly breathless in shock. His mouth wide open as they saw what was inside. His composure was still standing strong even with the many things he had seen in this compound with his naked eyes, but the thing before him was what took him into a speechless spur. As nothing, and no one would have expected what they were seeing right before them. "Dear God," Sansa said. An agnostic man himself, but he was far too surprised and shocked to even think about what he had said. More appropriately, it felt as if those words gave weight to the surreal sight that they were all seeing. As they all felt that no deity or someone above would condone such a hellish mess. On one specific person, across a large and spacious room that was as big as the quarter of a mile. The ambience, and the lack of light only solidified the weight of their situation. Tsukachi even saw Bubble Girl's hands on her flashlight shaking slightly to the deep, embroiled fear they were all trying to make sense out of. Even Night Eye's concealed features behind his glasses gave off a sense of uncertainty, a detail that was very unusual to the hero, whose composure and confidence were always astute and strong. "You should have been here about 40 minutes ago, he was still alive and writhing in pain when we first saw him," Night Eye slowly said, dull in tone but enough to get the message across. His screams filled the hallways until he finally went silent. Night Eye then pulled out his phone, giving it to Tsukachi after he and Bubble Girl managed to fly a drone to see the entirety of the breach's contents. The sight, while horrifying at first glance, was never as horrific as compared to how it looked in the perspective of the drone, of which managed to take images of the vast majority of the breach. The two detectives went silent as Tsukachi flipped the images one by one. Merely trying to describe it in words would not be enough. I heard that when a human being is stretched out end to end, including all the veins, organs, muscle tendons, and the rest, they would encompass at least 100,000 miles, wrapping the entire Earth at least 2 times or more. Night Eye explained as Tsukachi continued to see the pictures. We assumed that it wasn't just him within the breach that was killed in this manner, but given the quirk of our subject that got killed there, it wouldn't surprise me that whoever did this to him, managed to use his quirk against him entirely. With this as the result. Tsukachi gave the phone to Sansa, who continued to see the pictures, while he clutched the rims of his hat in response to the stress and fear his body was trying to regulate and control. Do you think this is his doing? Tsukachi whispered to Night Eye. Night Eye looked at him with an uncertain expression. All for One is known for many things, but a sadistic person to this degree he is not. He would prefer efficiency with his actions more so than blind rage and mania. This is different. Night Eye said, making Tsukachi to gulp in response as he still tries to process what he is seeing. Detective, since you're the one in speaking terms with our good friend, can you tell me how long can he remain as the symbol of peace in his current state? Night Eye asked. Not long. I'm afraid. Tsukachi replied, the implication to Night Eye's words putting a cold chill to their senses. The pro-hero adjusted his glasses, as fear of the future grew within him. Fear, the same thing he felt when he saw the future of All Might himself with his own eyes. The small glimpse never prepared him for this, however, and the consequences that came with it would only serve to remind them how little time they had left. How little their efforts would be to stop the inevitable. Hey kid, are you buying something or what? A voice called out, taking him out of his focus from the television that was displaying news reels of a topic he was recently hooked to. With a blink he managed to get his composure back towards the store owner who was waiting for him to pay up with the items he had on hand. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. The boy mused, as he quickly settled the things he wanted to buy on the counter for the store owner to organize his goods he bought. The store owner then saw the boy's attention slowly going back to the news, the sight giving him slight curiosity as he began to check in how much the boy needed to pay. You interested in that stuff, kid? The store owner asked. The young boy, 14 years of age, looked at the store owner with a piqued expression and decided to reply. His green hair and thin body noticeable through his baggy clothes. It didn't help that the bags under his eyes looked like he was having less sleep, and his messy green hair gave off the vibe of someone that had little to no interest with the things going on in the city around them. Although, the sharp expression brought forth by his green eyes seemed to contradict everything he was seeing. In fact, the way how lively it focused on him made him feel curious. Yes, I do, sir. Actually, I'm kinda into anything involving heroes and the like. He said as he squinted in a shy manner. Like he was ashamed trying to say that aloud. I can see that. Especially with the notebook you're carrying. The store owner replied as he saw the worn but still in shape notebook titled, Hero Analysis for the Future number 13, on its cover. Oh, why you mean this thing? I don't know about that, just a hobby if we're going to be honest. The boy explained with a shy demeanor. The store owner chuckled as he handed him his items after the boy handed his pay over. What do you write on it, if you don't mind me asking? The boy blinked in surprise. Even with his tired-looking face he seemed a bit shocked that someone was curious with his little notebook of sorts. The man did not look suspicious nor had any ill intentions based on his demeanor, so he felt comfortable enough to oblige. Just a few notes about heroes I've seen and encountered, sir. It might be useful someday. He explained, allowing the man to smile somewhat. The meek boy had dreams that he used to have back in the day. I reckon you want to be a pro-hero in the future, huh? Based on how focused you were earlier with the news and how dedicated you are to writing down things you've seen. I think you'll get somewhere, kid. Lord knows how much we need heroes now that crime is seemingly on the rise again. The kid perked up a bit with the compliment shared to him by the store owner. A quiver of a smile began to reach the edge of his lips, but it immediately vanished a second after. You have a problem, kid? And no, not really, sir. Why, you see, as much as I want to be a hero, I don't think I'm cut out for it. The boy explained as he looked at the news reel on the television. A discussion about the recent vigilante activity in Mizutofu being the main topic of the news. Even with the hero All Might on the scene, it felt as if the cases were still going on despite his influence. Why'd you say that? The store owner asked, putting the boy back to focus on him. He suddenly looked uncomfortable. The grip on the plastic bag where his bought goods were stored tightened. The store owner wondered why. The boy suddenly stopped in his tracks. Unsure what to say about his condition. He mumbled under his breath for a few moments, but he faltered trying to say the truth about himself. Thankfully he saw the store owner kindly smile at him, having understood why. The boy and him were the same. Hey, don't worry about it. I'm sure you can still be a hero. Don't ever think of anyone saying that you can't, because as far as I can tell, you have the heart and dedication for it. The man then winked at the boy as he placed a hand on his shoulder. The surprised look turned into a small, genuine smile from the boy as he understood what that meant. Both of them looking normal by standards of the society they were in allowed them to know when someone was like them. And who knows, kid, maybe you'll show the world what it takes to be a real hero. It's okay to dream every once in a while. But having dedication to try and reach that dream takes guts, and seeing you, I think you can make it. Thanks. I appreciate that, sir. The boy said. The two separated for a bit as the store owner eased himself back to the counter. With a final smile to the boy, he began to walk towards the exit after bowing in thanks. Before he could leave, however, the store owner whistled to him to get his attention. I never got your name. The boy smiled meekly towards him. Midoriya, sir. Midoriya, huh? I hope to see you soon, kid. The boy, who was named Midoriya, simply nodded as he left the store. The man's focus going back to the television as he eased himself in his chair. The headline bearing the words, Black Knight Vigilante Strikes Again, played on it as the discussions began to turn heavy, especially with the new cases and eyewitnesses involved. The man simply hummed to it as many officials were being interviewed on screen. The increased villain rate coupled with the news of this Black Knight further made everything uneasy as the nighttime outside continued to play in silence. In a few hours he would have to close soon, the earlier the better, just to make him feel comfortable amidst the new developments in the city he lived in. Sure, he had faith in the pro-heroes guarding his neighborhood, but one could never be too sure. A few whole minutes passed after the boy left. The silence of the store, while lonely, was something he was used to. Especially at this time of the night where lesser patrons would buy. He continued to watch the news until the door to his store was opened. Footsteps were heard, but he kept his focus on the television, knowing that the consumer would approach him when they were finished picking what they intended to buy. Excuse me. A voice suddenly said, firm and stern with its tone. Feminine. He turned his head, seeing a woman in front of him. Her sharp and intense gaze looking at him as if she were judging him in a harsh light. Despite that, the man was seemingly vexed with how appealing she looked. With her long, black and silky hair gracing her features that would woo any man quickly if she came across them. A yellow tie held her hair in a ponytail behind her head, coupled with what looked like a brown cloak, covering her entire body minus the head. Her face looked unimpressed, like she was trying to force herself to be respectful in front of him. A cloud of pressure erupted for some reason as the air became thick with a sensation of something foreboding and unfriendly. All of it, emanating from the woman standing before him. Like the appealing guise she possessed was nothing more than for display. The man then realized that he had not answered her question yet. He then proceeded to straighten his clothes as he faced her in a better position. "Pardon me, sorry if I offended you by staring." The woman did not reply, instead sighing as she tried to grab something out of her cloak. "I need information. Anything you can tell me to help in any way," she said. "Information? About what?" The woman then placed a picture on the counter, revealing a familiar green-haired boy seemingly uncomfortable as he stared at the camera. "Have you encountered this child recently?" she said with a serious tone as the man looked up to her, sweat trickling down the side of his head. A long brown folder was placed on a table. A recorder beside it, and a pen on the opposite side. A drawn-out silence was permeating in the atmosphere of this white, featureless room. A one-way window was situated on one side and a steel door was situated on the other. The only occupant within the room currently was feeling impatient. Greatly so, especially with the events leading up to where she was now. A conflicted mass of feelings overwhelmed her. And it didn't serve her well due to how everything played out. The air was thick with tension, even though she was the only one within the room. A bald set of fists were placed on the table. Anger, confusion, guilt, and regret churning inside her like a volcano about to erupt. The amassed feelings deep inside further heightened her intolerance, but she knew better than to lash out without reason. She knew better to keep it all to herself. She had to know better. She was a hero after all. One of the best. One of the strongest. Yet, why did she feel so useless? Why did she feel so weak? Why was she now so unsure of herself? Like everything that she ever believed in was just thrown out of the window. Like her belief on her own strength just disappeared into thin air. She always believed in being strong. Strength was the prime factor as to how she built herself. How she saw herself. Yet now it all crumbled before her eyes. Like her world was now downcast. The darkness about to take her much like how the single light bulb within this infernal excuse of a room shined dimly at her. She was already tired with everything. Already exhausted even though she had done so little in the expense of such a large failure. The overwhelming feelings of it never was lost within her. Like it latched on her as if they were leeches ready to suck her blood dry. Her heart continued to beat in increased strides. The mood sour and the only thing she could do was stare at the white walls and the metal table right in front of her. None of which helped with her current predicament. It only increased her immense displeasure, both with her current predicament and the situation she was thrusted into. Her right foot was tapping on the floor with such speeds that she swore it would crack soon. She would not care if it did, as her agitation was reaching its peak. Her frown was making her face unnaturally antagonistic. This sucks. She stared at the only clock within the room, even the DMN thing had its sound muffled. The silence was far too much for her nerves that her usually soft-looking tail had all the hairs on it sticking out. Even the fur on her ears were unsettled. Protruding with the mood she was in, with her eyes firm and focused, ready to castrate the first person that came through that door for making her wait. At least if she could. She was a hero after all, and conducting such uncouth behavior was not the makings of one. Nope. That's what those in her school once taught her, and she would still stop herself should she reach that point with her anger given the responsibilities she possessed. Still, it did not stop herself from thinking this way. Especially with what happened and what comes after it. Her rage on this matter was equal to the fear and feelings of uselessness permeating deep within her. In addition, she was still waiting news on one particular thing that stuck to her mind after everything that's happened since then. Massaging her temples to calm herself, she tried to imagine things that would make her feel easy. Or at least things that would lessen the boiling amount of feelings that was about to overflow at any second. Only a few came to mind, and it all circled back to her current predicament. She tried breathing. That's what most people tell her when she needed to keep her rambunctious, bottled-up feelings intact. When she needed to play it friendly, that is. Her image was still something she favored, especially on all of the people that believed in her. She straightened herself to try it. Maybe it would work. Maybe it won't. She heavily sighed and tried it. Only to get the opposite result. DMN it. What the F is taking them so long? As soon as she said that inwardly to herself, she wanted to scream it out aloud. She wanted to face that one-way window and let loose the most colorful words of the language she knew in full stride towards the personnel behind it. They could mute her for all she cared, but her message would go through. Regardless. However, having a meltdown inside a police station won't do well for her resume. Unfortunately, that was the truth, so she had to hope that whoever put her here would quickly come through those doors and get this done. She never even understood why she was here in the first place. She could have done a written report on it by her own. A small blush then appeared on her features, knowing that her secretary within the agency was the one who does her paperwork. Still, this whole mess would have been solved if the procedure went on a normal route. Yet here she was, in terms that she both understood and misunderstood at the same time. A frown then emanated on her face. Knowing full well that a part of her felt scared to know that this had something to with everything that's transpired. Everything. Her rage then slowly dissipated. Replaced by shame and regret. She was about to delve deeper in her thoughts when the door to this room clicked open. Her ears twitching towards the sound, but her thoughts remained subdued with her current mood. She then saw two police officers, or detectives in essence, entering the room. One remaining in a standing position by the side. He was unarmed. A part of her felt that it went that way to keep her calm. She was actually hoping that one of them had something behind their backs in case something happened. They trusted her too much not to go berserk at any time, but given her mental state, it would have helped to ease her in knowing that the police were not lax in handling someone like her. She would not dare to do anything stupid anyway. She trusted herself not to. Well, just enough to keep her in check. They looked tense though. She was unsure if it was because of her, or because of what happened. Miss Usagiyama, apologies for the delay. We wanted to talk to you sooner, but I'm afraid circumstances surrounding this case has brought a few complications. We thank you for coming still, for I'm afraid your testimony is a vital, key component to bring this all together. The other detective said. She then sensed that he was calmer and more at ease than the other one. She was unsure how to react to that. Crossing her arms, she gave the detective a neutral, but sour look. One that quickly devolved into something close to worry and shame. The detective did not notice that detail on her face yet, but he continued, seeing that she seemingly calmed herself down. Look, we understand that this is an unusual situation. Normally we'd only talk to you and get a copy of your report after everything is settled, but you do understand what we're dealing with here, right? The detective asked as he placed his fingers on the folder. Hoping to open it soon, he just waited for her response. Miss Usagiyama? Answer me a question first. She said in a low tone. Quite unusual, especially with her very unsubtle and exuberant personality. Nonetheless, the detective was eager to hear it. Of course. As long as it's something we can answer. She stared into the man's eyes. She was not good at reading people, but she bit her lip and asked her question without any lingering problem. Is she? She stuttered into a pause before finding her strength back to finish her words. The question making her fearful for what the answer was. Is she doing well? Is she alright? She finally said as the sound of the folder in front of her opening was heard. The detective keeping his gaze on her in a steady fashion. Are you inquiring for the status of the only Yuasa daughter? The detective asked, answered by a nod a second later. The detective suddenly sighed in an undetermined mood as he placed both hands on the table and conjoined them. His fingers interlacing with each other with both pinkies tapping on the paper within the opened folder. The action made her confused, probably something he uses to calm his nerves. I understand how you feel, Miss Usagiyama, though based on what I'm seeing, are you actually sure that you're stable enough mentally to receive the news about her? The question made her eyes widen slightly. Maybe it was a quirk, as he seemed very sure with how she was dealing with this whole ordeal mentally. That, or because she was bad at hiding her emotions, maybe both. Her ears twitching ever so slightly with any sound that was occurring within the room. Her senses at the highest as they can be, as she even heard the slow thumping of the other detective's foot tapping on the floor with minimal sound. She then thought about the question, asking herself that very same thing. "I'll be fine," she quickly said, her small tail moving in an unrelaxed fashion behind her. Thankfully, it was not seen by both detectives, leaving only her face, ears, and minor movements to her body being the factors that the two can read on her about. Unless one of them had a quirk that read her mind, that is. Hopefully not. "You sure? What part of 'I'll be fine' do you not understand?" she said in a firm manner. Not enough to be antagonistic, but enough to get her point across. The detective frowned slightly in response, but decided to tell her regardless. They were here to iron out the details of what happened after all. "Miss Nico is in a stable condition. Doctors have assured us that she will recover, even if some of the damage would likely scar over or be permanent," the detective replied in a tone full of pity and uneasiness. It was bad enough that he saw it himself. To her, however, she could only feel her heart drop in the most painful way. Her ears drooping slightly beside her head. "What kind of recovery are we talking about?" she asked. "I'll be frank with you. As I know, based on your reputation, you don't tolerate bullshit. But, seeing that this case means a lot to you because of what occurred, I'll be giving you a choice." She felt offended by that. The gaze on her red eyes intensifying. "I've said I was fine, didn't I? Or do you assholes think I can't handle it?" she mused, her aura turning into intimidation despite her friendly and arguably strong and appealing features. The two detectives paled for a second, but got their composure back. Knowing full well how she would react to the news she was inquiring on. "All right. The doctors have told us that the girl's mental state has experienced severe damage and possibly some irreparable trauma due to what the suspect made her and her family go through. There's a shred of hope that she can recover from it, but given that she hasn't talked nor made any interactions to the hospital staff indicates that the condition is serious. We're still looking into have the closest family members to come in contact with her, but none so far have come, and those we were trying to contact were either similarly missing or haven't communicated back." She bit her lip after hearing that. She buckled herself to stay calm. "There's more, right?" The detective begrudgingly nodded. She mouthed a curse word to herself, guilt and shame coming up inside her. A part of it was overpowering her current composure to break any time soon. She hoped not. She did not want to make a fool out of herself by turning into an emotional wreck. "Miss Usagiyama, painful as this is to say, the girl is paralyzed due to severe trauma on her spine. The only movable part in her body that's left is her head, and even then they've found out recently that some parts of her head had experienced similar, shock-inducing trauma. It's a miracle she woke up at all after everything that's occurred to her. One would say that it was willpower or to will to live on, but we both know that it isn't the case. Which means that she wouldn't be able to live a normal life due to her conditions. Physically and mentally." She mouthed. The silence eerily increasing the already stressful experience. "I know this is HRD on you, as it is to us. The girl was a large fan of you after all, and we're all here for her, so please make sure that your cooperation would spell the best for her condition. The BSTRD isn't even alive to get what's coming to him," she muttered as she thought about the culprit. The one that caused all of this. The one that dropped such a large impact in the span of a few hours on both the public's mind and society in general. And she? She was in the middle of it all. "She's the only one alive, right?" she asked, a part of her knowing that it was the whole truth and that there were no other survivors, but she wanted to make sure. "I'm afraid so. Her brother, kid had bled out before he can be saved. Their father and grandfather died due to severe trauma to their heart, and lastly the mother, of whom we can all say that we unilaterally failed on. The image of the woman screaming and thrashing as blood came out her nostrils and eyes would haunt her forever. Her nails now digging on the metal table as her teeth were gritted in place. "The number, give me the number," she then asked. "Miss Usajiyama, I'm afraid we see A ringing thud was heard in the room as she slammed her fist on the table, the surface denting in slightly. "For F's sake. I told you I can handle it, so be goddamn honest to me. My DMN head can't take all the pity-faced lies just because they want me to calm down," she said in anger, but a pleading emotion also surfaced. "Just tell me. We don't have the official count yet, but we're seeing an excess of about 1,990 confirmed deaths, with more adding to the list as we search the areas affected." The dam suddenly broke. She prides herself for being the strongest heroine in the eyes of the public, and she knew how to handle a loss. So much so that she puts double effort to avenge her losses, but this was far too much. A major disaster that could have been prevented if she acted fast enough before everything occurred. This was all her fault, and despite what others claim, it was her job to finish and she failed it, spectacularly. Nothing of this scale had ever occurred in recent years due to All Might's presence in Japan. But even he could not stop the already finished tragedy that rattled everyone's psyche. A warm flush of her blood came to her face as she looked at the table's reflection of herself. A tear dropped, splashing with a small sound due to her enhanced hearing. The two detectives looked concerned at her as she wiped it away, not accounting her eyes that were close to letting her sadness overcome her. The detective that was talking to her then sighed. "Miss Usajiyama, we can reschedule this if you would like to. We understand what you're feeling, and I think it's best that you hash these things out with yourself first before we continue with your case. We can wait long enough for you to recover, and until then we can share details to you to ease your current condition," he said as he was about to close the folder. However, a hand was suddenly placed on it, forcing him to stop. "Let's get this finished first. I'll feel better if we do this rather than just me running away from it," she told them with an adamant tone. Her face remained the same, with her broken-down emotions, but her stubborn personality and tenacity to at least do something with this mess was what kept her from shutting herself out. "Okay," the detective said as she settled back on her seat. The detective then took his pen and with a slight nervous action, he looked at her. "Where do you want us to start?" 1.5 days ago. Time, 11:47 a.m. A car was thrown into the streets as rampaging steel behemoths ran amok in Mizudafu Prefecture. A soft rumble of the earth was felt as frightened civilians scrambled to get out of the way of the machines that were wreaking havoc. The flurry of activity caused people to scream in terror for their lives as each stomp of their metallic limbs left potholes on the asphalt. The scene was starting to get chaotic, if it were not for the heroes that took action. Both in response to try and stop the metallic hulking beasts, and to try and minimize the damage, while also making sure the civilians were safe. None knew where the monstrosities came from, but their thick metal hides that bore 4 inches in width were able to bounce off gunfire from police officers as well as tank hits from some heroes that first caught sight of them. They were also quadrupedal in nature, sporting thick, armor-plated hind legs and segmented but armored frontal limbs that could work as arms whenever needed. At first, the heroes thought they were quirk users, villains that were operating specialized armor or mechanical suits to double their proficiency and destruction capability, but after seeing that they posed no outward intelligence, and only reactionary responses, it was speculated that they were only mere programmed battle units derived to carry out their programming in script. This allowed some leeway for some heroes to take them down with more added force to stop them on their tracks completely, as there was no probable cause on harm of any human being involved should they go all out on these machines. A thought that drove a certain rabbit hero to grin in excitement. The faster these things went down, the better for everyone. Which meant she was allowed to let her frustrations out in the most enjoyable way she could muster. "Get down," a voice called out as Kamui Woods shielded a group of civilians into the nearest wall of a store in front of them. One of the steel beasts that were about to pass them by were unaware of what just happened. For a streak of white seemingly descended from the proverbial heavens and crashed into the middle of the machine. The steel was bent with enough force that it crumpled it, leaving a crater in the middle of the road as the force from the impact and the debris that exploded into the surroundings left a shockwave that shattered the glass of all nearby storefronts. It also kicked up a hefty amount of dust into the air and smoke into the air as the machine's internal engines and wiring sputtered out of life. The civilians that were nearby were miraculously unharmed, mostly for Kamui Wood's efforts as he allowed his quirk to entangle and keep most, if not all, of them safe from the destructive outcome. The rest of the street where the impact had landed on, however, suffered immense but fixable damage. "Everyone okay?" a female voice said out of the middle as the dust cleared. An ample amount of the civilians present had smiles growing out of their faces as they saw the heroine, even with her disappointed-looking expression. Despite that, she looked at Kamui Woods, who had disengaged his quirk along with the sudden rise of voices from the civilians that recognized her. "Are you sure that was really necessary?" he yelled out. She replied with a shrug as she looked at the remains of the machine below her. "I stopped it, that's what matters." She then started to dust her costume off as a little girl's voice cheered out towards her presence. This garnered her a small smile in response. "In all honesty, I expected it to explode. Would have been better, don't you think?" she said with a grin as the wood-based hero felt surprised at her words. "Are you mad? Causing that much destruction would've." "Yeah, I know, but it didn't, so that's what matters." "Good thing you were there, yada yada," she said as she waved off the hero, for the inviting the sound of battle erupted down the street. As the surviving machines were still rampaging, the excitement of battle returning to her face. "We can't allow this to keep on going, more civilians will be put in." "Geez, you talk a lot. Standard procedure and the like." "I get it," she replied as she leapt off the machine to land just right next to him. Despite her immense leg strength, she landed without marking the ground beside him, displaying a level of control over her abilities that garnered some notice on the crowd. "Your annoying voice aside, tree man, I need you to keep up. There's only so much I can do to make sure those things don't hurt people, and your quirk is useful." She then slapped his back with enough force that the pro-hero staggered slightly from the hit. Kamui was about to say something back when an explosion was heard. "That's my cue." Leaping high into the air, the woman rushed down the street as fast as she could muster as Kamui shook himself to get his focus back on the job. He had heard and seen the efforts of the infamous Mirko, the rabbit heroine herself, but interacting with her up close like that along with the raw physical strength she possessed, astounded him. Add the fact that her presence and how she carried herself, was far more than what the rumors and reports say. She was a powerful hero all throughout, and there was no shred of doubt over her recent placings on the current top 10. To call her amazing was an understatement. I'm not done with you airs. With her ever-famous exuberant personality and colorful choice of words taking the cake. Another set of sounds were heard as the chaotic situation progressed, prompting Mirko and the heroes on the scene to double their efforts as more and more property damage revealed itself, along with the dangers of civilians being placed in the crossfire. Boom. Mirko cursed under her breath as a missile from those robots she narrowly dodged managed to hit a supply truck behind her. Thankfully the driver and the civilians near it managed to escape just in time to safety. The fireball caused by the hit soared high into the air, making the supposedly controlled situation far more worse than it first seemed. And those things showed no signs of stopping. Kamui arrived a second later to check for anyone needing assistance, only for Mirko to grab his wrist and pull him towards her. "I'm going to chuck you forward to the very front of those things." What? Are you deaf?" The situation is getting worse enough as it is and I can only combat those things up close. I need your quirk to keep the civvies safe. But I can perfectly catch up on my own. Why? I'm faster, there's no point arguing about it, but you're much more ideal to either catch those things for me to finish them off or to delay them long enough to keep civilians from harm's way. Alright, I accept. Bu, what are you, FUNFICTION? Mirko suddenly grabbed his waist and leapt high into the air. Hey! Make sure to land safely, tree man, she said with a playful and sadistic smile on her features as she angled him just enough to throw him towards a good distance. Are you not going to make me finish anything that I say? He shouted as he readied himself. Nope. Good luck. Kamui was sent sailing a few good meters ahead. His speed doubled by his flexible weight due to his quirk allowed him to glide somewhat smoothly in the air as he caught sight of the remaining 3 metallic beasts running into a few approaching vehicles carelessly. Kamui saw that there were passengers on those vehicles, so he shot out his quirk, the branches growing quickly as they can to accelerate him towards the very head of the pack. Hoping to stop the robot just in time before anyone was seriously hurt. The branches managed to push him forward just barely a few meters from the head of the pack as he landed cautiously on top of a red car with 2 passengers on board. The branches were able to halt his impact, but he had to brace himself as he needed to subdue the incoming behemoth. It was far closer than he deemed comfortable as the branches he conjured from his arms were just barely enough to stall and completely stop the momentum of the incoming scourge of mechanical might. The wooden branches that sprung in almost rapid succession buckled under the weight of the crashing hunk of moving metal that was about to ram him along with the civilians behind him. Normally, he would have announced his special move of his out aloud, but in this circumstance such polite and heroic extremities were unneeded. Especially since he only had the bare minimum strength to hold everything in place. He groaned in response as the metal monstrosity was clamoring to be let loose from its bonds. Its frontal limbs digging into the concrete to push itself forward. Metal plates reinforced themselves in whirring sounds of something being displaced and redirected as the weight doubled considerably. Screams and the like followed suit behind him as the following robot behind the one he had restricted of movement was now coming dangerously close by the side to try and free its comrade. Figuring that he had no strength to keep 2 of them at bay, he motioned to try and inform the civilians behind him to flee. Only to feel his strength waning as the one he was holding on to firmly with his quirk moved its hind legs forward forcefully to push him back. Tripling the weight, he was now holding just by the hair length of strength he had left. Allow us to assist, a voice called out as Kamui looked behind him and saw multiple pro-heroes coming into the scene to secure the civilians. Relief flooded into his head even though his focus and drive was still predominantly placed on the one robot he was holding on to. He recognized some of the new faces that came into the scene, but his comfort was short-lived as the other machine that came in second to the one he was holding now, had finally arrived. A startling sound of the ground rumbling was the first warning. As shockingly so, the other metal monstrosity in question managed to reconfigure its parts on its limbs and leapt into the air. High enough to scale over the wooden shackles locking its comrade down. Look out, a pro-hero behind him said as the brute landed behind him in a definite crash. Dust was thrown into the air, as Kamui's eyes closed. The weight of the contraption he was locking down now straining his arms to the very limit. He could feel the heat and pain of his muscles screaming at him to stop, but his determination to not let this slide or have the villain overcome him was the only thing that was stopping him from abandoning his duty. The one behind him however opened its frontal armor to release a set of new appendages to try and harm Kamui Woods to let go its comrade. Only to have them being caught the moment they lashed out towards him. No you don't. Death Arms, a fellow pro-hero said as he stood his ground. Protecting Kamui from the upcoming threat as his bulk and strength managed to hold the appendages in place. He then pulled on them to allow his other arm to take hold on the machine. Death Arms. I appreciate the support, but what about the civilians? Backdraft and 2 others have it handled. Let's just focus on them. The fellow hero stopped mid-sentence as the sound of excited, maniacal-like laughter filled the very air of the combat zone. In a split second, a white blur in the air was seen about to collide atop the one Kamui Woods was holding on as the rabbit heroine Mirko grinned in an almost lustful demeanor with the adrenaline of combat rushing into her veins. Luna Fall. The immense and rapid force emerging from her legs had hit the robot with enough momentum to utterly crush its upper torso like a knife through hot butter. The ensuing clash managed to tear the thing in two as pressure from the compounded impact managed to crack the ground Kamui was standing on. The imbalance shifted the weight off as he retracted his wooden constructs. Mirko suddenly cracked her knuckles as the dust cleared. She then saw the machine Death Arms was holding in place. She grinned in satisfaction, almost as if she had no visible strain nor fatigue from her otherwise devastating and physically straining set of attacks. The move she did earlier was just to test how strong her utter best was towards those things, as the frustrations and stress from all the paperwork and scolding remarks from her secretaries a few hours ago quickly grew into a headache. A headache she decided to fix by going a bit all out towards these bastards. She leapt in surprising speeds towards the next one as her feet collided with its side. The impact bending the frontal armor quickly as she pushed it off with her feet. The force almost sending Death Arms with it, had he not let go at the final second. She then rebounded on the closest building, keeping her momentum intact as the stone wall cracked when she leapt back towards her target. With a cry of battle rarely seen in most today, she swung her legs upward, almost cleaving the robot in two with the amount of force behind it. It was pushed back a few meters away, landing on top of an empty vehicle as its motor functions and systems began to shut down from the damage it considerably took. "Whoa!" Death Arms said as he saw the heroine regain her breath. Sweat trickling down her tan thighs and arms as the grin on her face was slowly going back to normal. The kick of adrenaline now subsiding from her muscles as the two pro-heroes watched in awe at the wake of her handiwork. She then turned towards them with a hand raised and a thumbs up. "Good job, guys. You two were actually useful for once," she said with a grin that the two were unsure whether to take it as a compliment or an insult. She then turned away to inspect her work as the two heroes were left in shock. "Did she just do all of that?" Kamui said to Death Arms as he looked around the destroyed parts of the machines they fought together on the scene. "Yeah. She did. I even had difficulty holding that DMN thing in place, and she just kicked them to Kingdom Come. Heh, I don't even know how to react. I see why she's in the top 10. Figures as much." Kamui said with an uncertain shrug as he looked at his male companion. "Yeah, but we still have work to do." Death Arms replied as they heard sirens of the police and the other first responders on the scene. Mirko on the other hand, while feeling ecstatic to let loose for a bit, felt as if her enjoyment was robbed as quickly as the fight had started. She was happy that she was able to prevent this as efficiently as she can, but her thirst for her battle was not satiated in the slightest. These things in particular felt as if they were made in less than durable metallic alloy. For she could not tell if she really hit those things with that much force or if those things were not durable enough to survive the amount of impact her legs and bodily strength contained. She was not all might level in terms of strength, but those things were strangely too weak to survive the bursts of her own hits. She then stood up and shrugged in contemplation. Maybe the one who made these hunk of junks were not smart enough to double the armor or at least invest in sturdier material for their robots to take hits from more physically inclined heroes such as herself. Well, it was not her problem to begin with. Her job here was done, and as disappointed as she felt, she knew that she had overstayed her welcome by asking a far more harder and challenging fight. Not that she wanted to, even though a part of her wished that. As soon as she was about to part the scene to leave things to the authorities, the communicator that was issued to her belt relayed a message. "Attention to all available personnel nearby, the third machine managed to escape via rooftops towards Kiyoshi Mall. Subject is on heavy pursuit and is gaining distance. Pro-hero assistance is required." Mirko instantly remembered that they were pursuing 3 of those bastards earlier. SHT. She then angled herself to leap back into action. "This is Mirko on the line, direct me towards the steel BSTRD," she said into her communicator as the ones on the other end complied to her request. "So you already had suspicions, at the get-go with those robots you, Kamui Woods, and Death Arms encountered," the detective asked as Mirko nodded. "Normally, it wouldn't spark anyone's interest. Because not all criminals or villains that we encounter are normally clever enough to begin with. But you would think that someone with the brains to make robots that were meant to attack the city with pro-heroes patrolling was at least certain to put countermeasures against heavy and physical fighters like All Might. Heck, that should be the top of their list given that the guy's bound to show up at some point when things go worse." "What makes you say that?" "Because it doesn't make sense that someone would just let those things loose with the intent to wreak havoc and not think of any means to make those things last. Even if it was a test, or a dry run. A trial if you will, you would very much be inclined to make sure your DMNF weapon is primed and ready to take damage and deal damage. I'm not as smart as those nerds creating support items for people like me, but I know DMN well sure that any genius with a brain should put all the possible outcomes of their project in mind before sending them off to do their jobs. They're villains. Most of those who break the law never think twice. Some mindsets thrive on simplicity, and most criminals go with that. True, but most of them don't steal or commit a crime that they're not confident in getting away from." Mirko rebutted, with the detective not saying anything else to reply. She did have a point. "Okay, moving along, so, once the request for backup was called, you immediately pursued the other mechanical unit. Walk us through until your eventual meeting with the suspect." "What's with the tone?" Mirko asked, a frown forming on her features. "One of annoyance. You dove in head first towards the enemy without backup. Leaving behind property damage and a whole slew of complaints. Minor in nature yes, but, the point still stands, Miss Usagiyama." Mirko suddenly squinted her eyes as anger started to permeate inside her. "I pursued the enemy, because I was the fastest one on the scene. I did what I had to do to stop it. You, admonishing me for doing what needed to be done is borderline stupid. No, we are not admonishing you for pursuing the hostile Miss Usagiyama, what we're admonishing you for is the fact that you refused to call in your position, the very moment you arrived at the suspect's hideout atop that metal contraption." An uncomfortable silence started to flow between the two. The tension high. "I recall that you are in fact a non-supporter of being cooperative with other pro-heroes, correct? Your reputation and basis of being a hero in the eyes of the public is specifically because you are independent and strong. Meaning you don't require assistance, and therefore feel annoyed when one forces themselves upon your work." Mirko crossed her arms by her chest in denial. "That isn't true. I may have the history of being a loner in this line of work, but I know my limits. I know when and where to call for assistance and backup. I'm not as one-sided as people think. I used to be like that, yes, but I've never talked dirty to anyone who doesn't deserve it. Having those two guys help me at the very start of this is evidence to that." "I see, then why is it that the moment you clung to that robot and outpaced the police convoy tailing you that you did not home in your position? Having that small amount of knowledge could have very well changed the outcome of the case. Are you, implying that I was part of this whole conspiracy? That I allowed that family and many others to die because of some dumbass reason that you guys can come up to shame me?" Mirko stood up from her chair in anger as she looked down at the detective. "No. Please sit down, Miss Usagiyama. We are not pointing fingers at you to be the cause of this." A loud clang to the metal table was heard as Mirko's fist bent the surface slightly with her bare and raw strength. The other detective in the room ready to call in backup in case the interview went sour. But instead of pure boiled rage, what was on Mirko's face was frustration, self-loathing, and guilt. A rogue tear dropped by her cheek as she slowly sat back on her chair. "Please do understand. We need all the details with this case. You know how delicate this is. You know how this'll affect what comes to the investigation and what the public views this as. F you. You're just happy to get me to agree on a few things about me. The rumors surrounding me. I know it. But if you want honesty coming from my part, then yes. I confess that I allowed my dumb but pride to finish this whole debacle and allow most of the credit to belong to me. I was so sure with myself that I could finish it alone. Do you want me to quote on your investigation that I was wrong? Then so be it. Because I'll take being swarmed by media trash than lie about how I failed to do the one thing I was ever good at. She paused, the words in her mouth were suddenly painful to let out. Saving people. She clenched her fists tight. And not a minute goes by that I don't think of their faces. How I could have changed things. How I could have stopped them from dying while I watched idly by, not doing a DMNF thing. A few seconds passed as Mirko looked downwards, trying to bite back the coming tears. I believe that's enough of a statement coming from you about that specific detail in the timeline. We acknowledge that you did what you thought was necessary, but whether it was right or wrong is no longer the problem here. Because the very moment you entered the compound, or the area of the hideout the suspect was shelving himself in, we've lost all communications and radio contact towards you. Even the homing beacon that was located on your belt with your registered signal was lost from the grid. I noticed. Mirko whispered with a low tone, still not able to face the detective. Even so, after our unit lost visual contact with you, we were still able to follow somewhat of where you and the metal contraption ended at. Would it have made a difference though? She asks. Pardon? Would it have made a difference, if I managed to call in my position along with the rest of the pros available on scene and the police force behind it? She locked eyes with him. Thoughtful, but guilt-laden eyes. Would we have changed the outcome if everyone was there earlier than expected? The question brought the detectives in a silent uncertainty. They looked at each other and thought about her question as Mirko waited for their reply. We're not sure. The suspect was very clever. He had planned this all too well. Would it have made a difference, if I wasn't the one who was called on to the scene? Are you implying that if other heroes were there instead of you, that they would have made a difference? That they would have changed the outcome? Mirko nodded, slowly. Perhaps. Though I doubt that's the case. The suspect had countermeasures as you said earlier. Even if we did have someone like Ed Shot or Hawks on the scene, I doubt they would have changed the outcome. Regardless of how better suited and optimal their abilities were in regards to this. So you admit that I was a shitty choice to handle that situation? No words were shared from the detectives, as Mirko knew the answer very well. Great. At the very least your eyes are more honest than your mouth. She mused. Clearing his throat, the detective flipped the page of the folder. Even so, Miss Usagiyama, we believe that the suspect just planned this all too well. So much so that even if it were the proverbial symbol of peace handling the crime scene, we think the margin of success was still lower than expected. What makes you think that? The mere fact that the explosives or the bombs he used to kill those in the areas he designated within the city are still not found. Nor are we even sure that there are bombs in the first place. It could very well have been a quirk, one that had superior range and senses. One that could even outpace and explode faster before even All Might could take action. The mere fact that we're still putting the possibility of there being an explosive is because a quirk of such nature does not exist. There have been no cases within the registry that indicates remote-controlled explosive, quirks or the like that fit the description of the instances we all saw. What? Yes, that's why this case has been so difficult to understand. The outlier of these explosives is still not understood, and these explosives are so specific. They contain enough force to level an entire city with their strength alone, but they were isolated within one spot, destroying any and all occupants within that specific area. Anything out of it is untouched. Those that were within the targeted areas are all but have succumbed to the effects of the explosions. Mirko's eyes widened to the implications of the effects of such an ordinance. Even if it was something man-made or a quirk. Well, SHTT, that's truly, wow. That's actually scary to think. Yes. There wasn't even a shockwave to speak of. The very nature of these explosives do not come in line with the laws of physics. Our experts are having a strong time trying to understand why these specific bursts felt like they were contained within those designated spots, while ultimately nullifying the damage from those outside it. Then that means, it wouldn't have made a difference. Even if it wasn't me there. Correct. Which is why we need your first-hand perspective with this. We need to understand what exactly the suspect told you during the whole time you interacted with him. Okay. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 2. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author lazyfrogofjustice on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.